views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
What's on your mind? Express what's on your mind. What's on your mind?
Anything relevant to life, you bring it to the table. Whether you make a move solo or a movement with a stable. No fables, you speak on your decisions. Cause in the long run, it's your voice, your views, your vision. Keeping it real with many messages for you to know. This ain't radio, but DJ runs the show. Entertainment, he rocks it. Politics, he locks it. The host with the most would handle any topic. Don't forget to share your perspective with shines of light. Cause it might make a difference in someone else's life.
Make a difference in someone's life. Express what's in your heart and your mind. Share your perspective.
What's your perspective? Let them know.
And hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Perspectives. I am Daren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. And as always, you can watch Perspectives here on BronxNet's Channel 67. And if you have Verizon or Optimum, that's Channel 2133. And anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. We also tell you that the best way that you can also go and find out more about the show, listen, visit us on our website at bronxnet.org. And if that's not enough, listen, check us out on our social media pages. We've got Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. Those are all ways that you can get connected to us here at the show. We want you to be connected. And as we move towards 2021, we got some great, exciting guests. And of course, yours truly is going to be bringing you the information and things that you need to know. You're invited to stay connected to me on Facebook. That's Daren C. Jaime. That's my professional page. And then also on Twitter and Instagram at DCJaime23. Well, guess what? Coming up on today's show, we are very excited about our guest today. My guest is an American jazz drummer. He's a composer as well as a band leader. He is the son of jazz pianist Thelonious Monk, one of the greatest jazz musicians of all time. And guess what? He is joining us today to talk a little bit about his career, as well as some undiscovered, unreleased work of his late father, plus the future and contributions of jazz music on Black culture. And I'm pleased to be joined right now by T.S. Monk. And T.S., good to have you, my brother, and welcome to Perspectives.
Good to be here, Darren. My pleasure.
Hey, it's an honor and a privilege to have you sharing with us here. I mean, in the middle of COVID, thank you for taking the time out because I know you're a busy brother. You got a lot going on.
I'm busy, Darren, but I'm sheltering in place. So I ain't going nowhere.
You ain't going nowhere. Well, that's why we was able to catch you because you ain't going nowhere. But just because you ain't going nowhere doesn't mean that you're not doing some stuff. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, some of the things that you're doing, first of all.
Sure.
And as I know, you got a lot of things going on. I gave the intro, but you got so much. You're an artist, you're a producer, you're a composer, you're a drummer. So let's talk about what you've been up to these days.
Well, wow. Most recently, I've been up to producing an album on my father. It's actually right behind me. It's called Thelonious Monk Live at Palo Alto High School in 1968. And, guys like Thelonious Thelonious had a very spotty recording career. He was on Blue Note Records, then he was off Blue Note, then he was on Prestige, then he was off Prestige, then he was on Riverside, then he was off Riverside, then he was on Sony. And so there were a lot of gaps in his career, and people had a tendency to record him live whenever they could because they loved him so much and there weren't enough records. Unlike an artist, say, for instance, like Miles Davis, who spent his entire career at Columbia Records. And if you want to get everything Miles did, pretty much, you just go to Columbia and you get it all. It wasn't that way for Thelonious. And so he did this concert in 1968. And it was on a very, very, very good day. He was playing his you-know-what off. The band was rocking, and it was recorded by this 16-year-old kid that actually hired Thelonious Monk, one of the greatest jazz musicians in the world. And the way he got to Thelonious was he did what people never like to do, which is he called him up personally and said, Mr. Monk, would you come to Palo Alto High School to perform? And My father had a thing for kids. He was crazy about me, crazy about my sister, crazy about all my cousins. Even before I was born, he used to take cousins and stuff on the road with him, you know? And so I think that had a lot to do with him responding to this 16-year-old kid. Because, you know, I mean, he was dealing with the biggest jazz promoters in the world. And then the 16-year-old kid calls him up and says, would you come to Palo Alto? And it was at the height of the civil rights movement in this country. In 1968, there had been assassinations, there had been riots. And, you know, a lot of people, you know, when they talk about Monk, they say, oh, well, Monk was a genius and he was just into his music. But the reality is that Thelonious was very politically aware. And just like, you know, I tell people, Billie Holiday wrote Strange Fruit about the lynchings that she saw down south as she toured the South in the 30s and 40s. All of the musicians saw that same strange fruit. Dizzy and Miles and Max Roach and Art Blakey and Duke Ellington and Count Basie, they all saw that stuff. And so they were all very politically aware. And at the time of this concert, Palo Alto was as divided a city as you could imagine. In fact, there was a movement at that very time in Palo Alto to rename East Palo Alto, right, Nairobi. So that gives you an idea of how upset the African-American community was with what was going on in Palo Alto. And I think Thelonious was aware of that. He was working down in Berkeley, right? So he was already out there in California. And then this kid calls him up and he says, okay, man, I'll do the gig. It wasn't a bunch of money at all. I mean, he had a 4-piece band, and I think the kid had $500 for him. But I think it intrigued him that this kid was calling him up and asking him to perform. And so he responded. And what turned out to be just a quiet Sunday afternoon is one of the greatest live performances that I've ever heard by my father. Yeah. You know, it was absolutely wonderful. The record right now is it's on the pop charts, amazingly, in Billboard. It's getting 5-star reviews from everywhere. And I'm very, very pleased for my father. You know, what happened was this young kid, he decided that he wanted to have Monk perform. Monk had been on the cover of Time magazine. So people were aware of him, especially white America, because, you know, in 1968, Time magazine wasn't like it is today, where, you know, if you sell 1 million records or blow up a building, you get on the cover of Time magazine. Time magazine was reserved for the likes of Winston Churchill and Dag Hammarskjöld and people like that. So for Monk to show up on the cover of Time magazine under an article that said Bebop and Beyond was amazing. And so this kid by the name of Danny Shear decided to call Monk, and Monk responded. And he went to East Palo Alto, right, to put up posters and signs and all that about this concert. And nobody believed that he could bring Thelonious Monk to Palo Alto. So he actually made a deal with the local police department that he would have people gather in the schoolyard of Palo Alto High School to see if Monk would actually show up. And he said he never felt so relieved in his life when he saw this car pull up and there's a bass fiddle sticking out of one of the windows. And it was Thelonious and his quartet. And there was a huge crowd there. They filled the auditorium. It was a packed house. And the concert was history. I knew nothing about it. I was back in New York. I had just graduated from private school and hadn't been on the road with my father. So I had no idea that this concert had taken place. And what happened was Danny Shear, he recorded the concert, and then he went on to become probably the executive assistant to one of the greatest rock and roll promoters, Bill Graham, and forgot about this Monk concert. And then he said he was cleaning his attic or his garage or something, and he came across this tape. He called me about it. I was really, really busy. He called me about 10 years ago. I was really, really busy, didn't even pay any attention to what he was saying, and I forgot about it. And then he called me up like last year, and he said,
"What did you do about it?"
What I did was I listened to his story.
Mm-hmm.
And once I listened to the story and actually listened to the concert, I said, oh man, this is one for the ages. This has to get out there. And we've been having an absolute ball ever since. I was able, in 1990, I think it was 1990, no, it was 2000. I think it was about 2008, 2007. Me and Grand Mixer DXT restored a live concert called Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane live at Carnegie Hall. Mm-hmm. And that has now been elevated to the #2 all-time selling jazz record, second only to Kind of Blue in 10 years. And of course, it took Kind of Blue 50 years to get to where it is. And so we collaborated again to restore this concert, because this concert was recorded by the high school janitor, who also doubled as the piano tuner. So this was
he's the janitor and the piano tuner, and he's the one that comes up with the tunes.
He comes up with the tape, and he recorded it on a little monaural tape recorder, and we utilized all the finest technology today to bring this concert into focus so that it sounds literally like it was recorded last week. And of course, Monk is timeless, so the performance is just outrageous. He's performing with his great collaborator Charlie Rouse on tenor saxophone, and Ben Riley on drums, and Larry Gales on the bass. And they really, really rocked it down. I mean, it was amazing. When I listened to the concert, I said, wow, listen to Dad. I could always tell when my father was feeling really good. Monk was unique enough that if you just went to hear Monk under any circumstance, it was quite an event. But I, having been with him all the time, I knew when he was feeling really good and when he was just being himself. This date, he was feeling really, really good, and the band was rocking. So to have this performance combined with this incredible backstory has just been one for
history. It's history that we're getting ready to experience, a history that we're getting ready to take home with us. Listen, I want to take a quick break. I want to come back. We talked about Dad. Let me talk a little bit about you.
Sure.
Your music, your influence. Taking a quick break here on Perspectives. T.S. Monk here with us, dropping some history, dropping some knowledge. Stay with us. We'll be right back right after this. We're back here on Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you, and our guest T.S. Monk, talking a little bit about the life of Thelonious Monk in our first segment, letting us know about how that whole thing played out in Palo Alto High School in California. And to this day, still history. And hearing it is just having history relive. You got to be excited for what's getting ready to come. We'll talk about how you can check that out in the future. But listen, T.S., let me get to this. We talked about a 16-year-old in 1968. It actually, turns the corner. But let's talk about a 15-year-old. That's you. At 15 years old, you decide and come tell Dad, listen, you know what? I'm going to play the drums. And you feel like you feeling it now. You want to be this drummer. So what happens when you tell Dad that you want to be the drummer and get in on the game at 15?
My life has been bizarre, the whole thing right up until today. So I say to him, Dad, I think I want to play the drums. Now, I had been practicing in private school, but I never brought sticks home, right? Mm-hmm. But so this is kind of like a surprise to everybody. And I say, Dad, I want to play the drums. And he looked at me and he said, you're late. That was the first thing he said. Mm-hmm. And then he did something really unusual, because I was the official telephone answerer for the house. Mm-hmm. But my father actually picks up the phone. He made 2 telephone calls. The first telephone call was to Art Blakey, the great Art Blakey, from Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers. Mm-hmm. And he says, Art, the kid wants to play the drums and he needs some drums, right? And like a week later, a set of drums from Art Blakey came to my house, right?
Wow.
Now that's a while. But the second call, that call with Art Blakey, because they were really good friends, and so they jaw gummed a little bit. So I'll say that call was a minute and a half, right? Then he puts the phone down, he picks up the phone again, right? Now I'm saying, whoa, Dad's making phone calls, right? And he calls Max Roach. This phone call couldn't have been 30 seconds. He picks up the phone. He says, hey, Max, look, you're the greatest drummer in the world, and the kid wants to play the drums, and I'm sending him to your house. Click. And then he tells me, go to Max Roach's. And that's really how my whole drumming career got started with Max Roach and Art Blakey, and then he didn't say a word to me for the next 5, almost 6 years. Not one word. He didn't say.
What do you mean he didn't say a word? So you telling me like you're practicing?
He
and he's not asking you how it's going.
Radio silence. Radio silence. No, but the brilliance. There was a brilliance involved. The brilliance was that he knew what a difficult task becoming a jazz musician was going to be. He knew that if I wanted it, just like he wanted it, nobody was going to have to tell me to practice. Nobody was going to have to tell me to study. I was just going to do my due diligence. And so I did. And I went from practicing a half hour a day to an hour and a half a day to 3 hours a day to 5 hours a day to 7 and 8 hours a day. Not one word on the subject of music at all. I'm 21. He comes walking through the house. I ain't doing nothing. I ain't working. I'm just practicing all the time. He comes walking in the door and he looks at me in the living room and he says, "Are you ready to play, man?" And then he goes on to his bedroom. And I knew he wasn't talking about basketball.
Right.
And about 5 days later, I was on the bandstand with him. The very first gig I played with him was actually a television show, a great show that aired here in New York City called Soul, hosted by a brother by the name of Ellis Hazlip. And it was Malcolm X's birthday show. And I find myself on the set of this television show. And there were always object lessons with guys like Thelonious Monk, right? And so I'm geared up. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to roll. My favorite tune is Monk's Dream, and I'm going to swing it down like crazy. But my father, my dad always said, everything's happening all the time, and you got to be ready all the time, right? And so he calls a tune called Boulevard Blues are, which is like a slow blues that you don't even play with the brushes. You got to play it with the sticks. This is a task. And that was the first lesson I learned from my dad. Be ready for anything on a jazz bandstand at any time. And that
so here's the question. The question is, were you ready?
I was ready. I was ready because let me tell you something about Thelonious Monk. I was his son. But if I was not happening, he would have fired me that day. I'm telling you. I'd seen him do it. I'd seen him do it. But obviously, I lived up to the task, and I spent the last 5 years of his career touring with him. And I'm extremely grateful to my dad for doing that for me, because he basically, even though I was his son, he basically threw me, like people say, "Oh, you want to teach your kids to swim? Throw them in the lake. And he'll swim or he'll drown." That's what my father did for me. And I was able to swim. And I'm very proud of that fact, but I'm very grateful to him for doing it that way. He wanted to make sure that I was in jazz, not because he was a jazz musician, not because he was famous, but because I actually loved my instrument. And I do.
Yeah. I want to take a quick break, come back and talk more with T.S. Monk. We're taking a quick break here on Perspective, getting the history on how it happened. We're going to talk after the break about something special, preserving the legacy of his father. That's coming up when we return. We're back here to Perspectives. Daren Jaime here with you, and I want to let you know we've got T.S. Monk We are chopping it up, talking about the legend, Thelonious Monk in the world of jazz, and not just jazz, but of course, to T.S. Monk, that's his father. And so there's a lot of history there, and we're proud of it. But I want to talk to you about you, T.S., because in your own way, you're paying it forward. You got, some work that you're doing where you're talking about how he helped you out as a young person. You're helping young people out today. Talk to me about some of the work that you're doing with your art agency.
Well, first of all, I was founder and chairman of the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz for 28 years. And now, with the help of my cousin, Marcella Flake Monk, there are monks all over the place, by the way. It's one of those typical family diasporas where we migrated out of the South, and some went to California, and some went to New Haven, and some went, even the great wide receiver Art Monk.
I was about to say, yeah.
Oh, that's family. That's total family.
Okay.
His dad and my dad were first cousins, and so we formed the Monk Jazz Youth and Steam Collective out of New Haven, Connecticut, where there's been a great monk presence for many, many years. And we're dedicated to not only music, but to all of the arts, dance, theater. We are dedicated, it's a STEAM collective. So it's about science, it's about technology, it's about mathematics, it's about all these things, because our youth right now, and quite frankly, all of the youth in America, needs a little bit of help, especially going through this pandemic, and they've lost a year of schooling. And so there's life on many levels needs to be subsidized substantively, with all these other things. And we just formed the collective, and we have a major event, our first event, cyber event, on Sunday. It's called Monk 103. And I'll be there with Dr. Robin Kelly, who, of course, wrote the great biography of my father, and several members of the educational community from New Haven, along with a young saxophonist by the name of Wayne Escoffrey, who is a Monk Institute graduate, who is working very closely with Yale University. And we're going to make a lot of noise. We're dedicated to helping our youth on many, many levels. And so I'm looking forward to this. I hope ultimately we'll have the same kind of success that I had with the Thelonious Monk Institute of Jazz. And I'm just very, very excited. We're just getting off the ground right now, but we've got a lot of support, particularly when you have, a great institution like Yale University involved. It allows you to do a lot of things. So we're sort of playing out exactly what we're going to do. When I formed the Monk Institute, I went to the giants that I knew at the time, which were Clark Terry, Max Roach, Dr. Billy Taylor, Donald Byrd, a gentleman by the name of Willie Jones, who was a great drummer, the drummer for Lester Young and Charles Mingus, a man named Freddie Brathwaite, who is the father of Fab Five Freddie. He's a jazz cat too. And I said to them, what do we want to do? And they said, well, we need a venue that is exclusively for jazz. There's classical conservatories all over the world and nowhere where you can learn jazz. And so that was the emphasis behind the Monk Institute. The STEAM Collective is the same kind of thing, except that we want to now expand to other areas of importance for our youth. And so again, we're talking with all kinds of people about exactly what we want to do, exactly what our first programs will involve. And so I would tell your listeners and your viewers that over the next year or two, you'll hear a lot about the Monk Collective coming out of New Haven.
It's amazing. And I want to talk a little bit about this. I only got a couple minutes left, but I do want to get this here. One of the things that really bothers me, I'm a Martin Luther King fan, right? The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I think, not just a fan, but I mean, he definitely was one of my heroes. one of the things that gave me great pain was watching the King estate go away. And for you, I know it's a little bit different because when it comes to the estate of your father, somebody's in control.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty much in control. And I have to tell you something. My father and his peers, the Dizzy Gillespie's, the Duke Ellingtons, the Louis Armstrongs, and Miles Davises, and John Coltrane's, and those kind of people, they weren't really that documented the way, like every little peep and burp that Mick Jagger makes. I got to hear about that on the news. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
But they were not documented. And I always felt, particularly right after my father passed away, that my father kept me on his leg because he wanted me to understand the philosophy, because jazz is not a technique. It is a philosophy based on the fundamentals of this democratic experiment we call America. It's about communication. It's about inclusion. It's about teamwork and individuality, all these things. And I always felt that one of the reasons my father kept me on his leg, he never pressured me to become a musician, but he wanted me to learn the philosophy. And what I realized about that was that you needed somebody that could talk about this from a first-hand perspective, and talk about the musicians and talk about the importance of jazz from a first-hand perspective. And that's what I have. So I always felt like I had to speak for him. I had to speak for all of them in a way that the man on the street could understand it, because it's one thing to talk about jazz from an intellectual perspective, but it's more important, I think, to talk about jazz from a human perspective, what it means to humanity, what it means to the African-American community. One must remember, this is an art form that came from the minds and the hearts of children of slaves. And like many oppressed people, if you go to Auschwitz, right, you'll find that people in the concentration camps were still drawing scenic things on their walls, their aspirations, And so this thing called jazz actually embodied the aspirations of African Americans, because we were denied our freedom. We were denied communication. We were denied inclusion. We were denied being part of the team. Our individuality didn't matter. And all of these things are embodied in jazz. And so when I talk to youth about jazz, and they say to me, well, Mr. Monk, what is jazz? I say, jazz is America. Jazz is the musical manifestation of this fantastic experiment called America. And I've always felt it's my duty. My father sent me to fancy private schools up in Connecticut, boarding schools, for thousands of dollars. I don't even know how he paid for it for me and my sister, but he did it. And it was also that I could speak today, not only with authority, with intellectual clarity about what this jazz thing is really all about. And that's another thing I'm grateful. My parents, they were monsters. They hooked me up. They hooked me and my sister up, really, up here.
And the one thing about it is that we know, as the old saying goes, the apple does not fall far from the tree. So I want to thank you for being that apple, and want to thank you for what you're doing. Listen, you got to come back, and we got to talk some more, because it's too much for just a half hour. We got to get more in. So promise me you'll come back and we'll do this again.
Anytime you want me. Anytime you want me.
No, for real, we got you. And I'll be calling you real soon, T.S.
Okay.
All right. T.S. Monk, our guest here on Perspectives. And listen, a lot of history. And in order to know, where you're going, you got to know where you come from. And T.S. lets us know a little bit about the great history of Thelonious Monk, but not only his history, but the destiny that T.S. is doing himself. As you saw his information at the bottom of the screen, how to get connected. Make sure you get connected, find out more information. And for all of us here on the Set of Perspectives, listen, take care, stay safe, share your perspective with somebody else. You just don't know. It might make a difference in somebody else's life. Take care.